Why don't we go ahead and get started? I'm Christine Scanlon. I'm the president and CEO of the Keystone Policy Center, and I want to welcome everyone with us today for what will be an incredibly important conversation. Keystone is grateful to Denton's and the Smart Cities and Connected Communities think tank virtual roundtable series that we often get to collaborate together on these forums. And today in particular, it's a bit of a Keystone reunion of sorts. We have a few people really closely connected to Keystone who will be a part of our discussion today. And that includes our chair, Paula Gold-Williams, Carolyn Green, who's also on our board of trustees, and Paula Glover, our other Paula, who's also on the executive committee of the Keystone Policy Center. So it's awesome to see one another. I'm actually here in DC today, and we should have done this in person with some of us. now that I look around, who's in the area with me. This is a really important conversation, and our panel was having a little offline discussion on the timeliness of the topic today, which is part 2. Where do we go from here? DEI, ESG, and energy justice in a post-pandemic world. And particularly given that this is the week we celebrate the Dr. Martin Luther King and his legacy and the power of his work and words. We are grateful to be able to assemble together and have this conversation with all of us today and everyone who's joining. With that, I'm going to turn over my piece of this to Belinda Reed, who will be taking us forward as we start our conversation.
Thank you. My name is Belinda Reed, and I am the Regulatory Performance Manager at Pepco Holdings and Vice President of Washington, D.C. Metropolitan Area Chapter of the American Association of Blacks in Energy. ADC is committed to increasing and improving opportunities for input of African Americans and other minorities into the discussion and development of energy policies, regulations, R&D technologies, and environmental issues. As we support each other, we build stronger communities and prepare a pathway for the next generation of diverse leaders in energy and in our local community. ADC has proudly excelled in the areas of professional development, community engagement, and membership growth. Through our engaging events and networking opportunities, members often find valuable connections and lifetime friendships. If you would like more information or would like to become a member, please visit our website at www.adc.org. Today, we're excited to partner with Denton's and Keystone Policy Center again to bring you part 2 of this panel discussion, which includes 8 executive committee members, Katora Brown, who is our president, and Clarence Hawks III, who is our secretary. Welcome and thank you for your time. With that, I would like to pass it over to Presley Reed Jr.
Good morning. Thank you, Belinda. My name is Presley Reed, and I, along with Clint Vince and Emma Hand, am one of the founding partners of the energy practice here at Denton's, the only law firm with the local depth and global reach to reach clients, help clients navigate the current global environment across 82 countries. I also serve as one of the co-chairs of the Inclusion, Equity, and Justice pillar of Denton's Smart Cities and Connected Communities think tank. Our Smart Cities initiative helps cities and communities take advantage of the technological developments by bringing together the resources of the world's largest law firm to help craft innovative legal, economic, and policy solutions to the societal challenges in this ever-changing world. First, I want to thank all of you who have joined us today for what will be an engaging and thought-provoking conversation. I want to thank the Keystone Policy Center and the American Association of Blacks in Energy in co-hosting the second seminar asking, where do we go from here? DEI, ESG, and energy justice in a post-pandemic world. Also want to thank our moderator, Dr. Christy Murray, who currently is the Director of Stakeholder Engagement for the Rosen Group. Dr. Murray has over 20 years of public and private sector experience in the energy industry, She's an internationally recognized certified facilitator and also serves as the undersecretary for the AABE chapter here in Washington, D.C., among her many volunteer commitments. Welcome, Dr. Murray.
Thank you, and hello and welcome to all of our guests. I want to just start out today's phenomenal panel discussion by providing a little bit of context. In light of a considerable push across the energy industry towards racial equity and social inclusion over the last few years, we find ourselves asking the question, how are energy companies creating sustainable, large-scale, transformational advancements in both the workplace and in communities that we work, live, and serve in, especially considering the growth and the growing threat of a global economic recession in 2023. According to the Initiative of energy justice refers to the goal of achieving equity in both the social and economic participation in the energy system, while also remediating social, economic, and health burdens on those historically harmed by the energy system, such as frontline or marginalized communities. The essence of energy justice is to make energy more affordable, accessible, clean, and democratically manageable for all communities. One of the major themes that emerged from the part one of the roundtable discussion from last summer was centered around balance. And how do we balance energy justice with other competing industry challenges? Considering the looming threat of the global recession, changes in workforce strategies, and the implementation of new federal policies in 2023, these topics certainly warrant more discussion. So to advance the discussion, our distinguished panel will discuss issues of balance. How do we balance diversity, equity, inclusion, environmental, social justice, and in energy justice overall with other competing energy challenges in the post-COVID era? I want to welcome all of our esteemed panelists who have joined us today and our energy leaders. So I want to certainly give each one of our panelists an opportunity to provide a brief introduction of yourself, and then we will advance the panel discussion with questions. So I'm going to start with Ms. Carolyn Green. Thank you.
I was afraid you might do that. I'm Carolyn Green. I am currently the managing partner of Green Capital Management. I invest in energy and environmental companies, basically to try and grow companies owned by people of color to scale. That's after a long career in energy and in the environment. In fact, my involvement in energy really stems from my involvement in the environment. So I play at the nexus of energy and its impact on communities and public health. I think that's really where I will leave it, because it will spur a number of issues, at least in my mind, as we move forward on how do we protect vulnerable communities as we change and transform our energy landscape.
Thank you. Next, we will go to Ms. Paula Glover.
Thank you and good morning. Good morning, everybody. My name is Paula Glover. I currently serve as the president of the Alliance to Save Energy. We are a 45-year-plus old nonprofit here in Washington, D.C. That's really focused on federal advocacy around energy efficiency. And we are a bipartisan coalition. So my members are industry, government, environmental organizations, consumer advocates, and the like, all with a focus. And so this particular conversation is of interest to me for a couple of reasons. First, so thrilled that it's being co-sponsored by ABE, an organization that is very, very dear to my heart, having served as a CEO. And when I heard Belinda read the mission as she talked about the chapter, I have to tell you guys, I smiled inside. It just just so thrilled, but also because if we're going to talk about justice and not just talk about how do we protect our communities, but also what are those opportunities that our communities can take advantage of, I believe that a lot of those opportunities are in efficiency. And so, you know, the opportunity for us to kind of explore how we grow people, our businesses, and our communities is super important and thrilling. So thank you for having me. Dr. Christie, I think you're muted.
Oh, thank you. Next, we'll go to, I thought I clicked the button, Ms. Paula Gold-Williams.
All right. It is always my pleasure to follow Paula. I currently serve as chair of the Keystone Policy Center, as Christine says. You know, our center focuses on the issues of trying to help the conversation and the dialogue move forward. We have a huge focus on policy at the federal level, at the state level, and local level, if possible. We very much think about the impact of energy. We have a whole segment of our board that is also focused on energy. And we in turn look at how we're affecting people of color, indigenous communities, and the impacts that it comes through knowing about education, food insecurity, all of the things that really affect society today. My background in energy started before, though. I became a member of Keystone and then had the pleasure of chairing. I ran a utility in San Antonio, Texas for over 6 years and had been in the industry for 17. So I love this industry. It is the place where you think about long-term service and you ultimately think about all the communities and all the people that you serve. So it is my pleasure to be here. I am also a member of the think tank that focuses on the energy sector for Dentons and several other organizations. I think this conversation is important. I love the fact that we're here for part 2 and looking forward to the conversation with my colleagues and from hearing from the audience today.
Thank you. Next, we will go to Ms. Keturah Brown.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you all for having me. As Christy mentioned, my name is Keturah Brown. I am a senior managing associate at Sidley Austin LLP within the firm's Energy and Infrastructure Group. My practice covers all aspects of the energy space, both domestically as well as internationally, pertaining to the natural gas space as well as utilities. I also have the pleasure of serving as president of ABDC, and both of those positions bring me great joy, and it's certainly a pleasure to be here, and I am looking forward to today's conversation. Thank you, Christy.
Thank you, Keturah. And last but certainly not least, Mr. Clarence Hawks.
Yes, good morning, and thank you, Christy. It's been an honor and a pleasure to be on today's panel with such an esteemed group of energy professionals. My name is Clarence Hawks. I am a managing associate at Dentons, which is the world's largest law firm. And I sit in the Washington, D.C. office. And I represent an array of clients in the transmission space, as well as many other energy sectors, also both internationally and domestically. I'm looking forward to today's discussion, and I am very, very interested in this topic, and I think that we will have a very constructive and informative discussion today.
Thank you very much. So now we've heard introductions, and as you all can see from what we've heard is that all of our panelists have very diverse backgrounds. So there's a lot of great expertise we can tap into in today's discussion. And I do want to remind the audience that should you have any questions that you'd like to ask, feel free to put your questions in the Q&A feature. It's the 2 bubbles at the bottom for Q&A as opposed to the chat, but we'll try to monitor them both. But certainly make sure that you ask your questions throughout today's discussion. So as we emerge from the post-COVID era, how different is the energy environment now in terms of employment, policy changes, and even economic challenges? So I'll tee it off and just pick on one of the panelists to get us started. Ms. Glover, can you start us off?
Sure, thanks for that softball. Super appreciate it. So much has changed post-COVID, post-pandemic. If we all kind of think about how we thought about energy in 2019 and early 2020, most significant of that is that we had a very different president who had a very different set of priorities as it related to energy. With this new administration, we've seen, I think, historic investments in energy and an energy transition that moves us to a cleaner fuel mix. We're seeing a real commitment to energy justice as we talk about it through his Justice 40 initiative, and in the money that's being committed to our communities around energy in this transition. And so there's a lot that's very, very different. More recently, we've seen 2 African-American men being named CEOs of 2 of the largest energy companies in this country and in the world. That is enormous. Other than those 2, we've seen other African-American men and women move into leadership positions in this industry. And so I would just say the world is different. I don't think it's time for the parade. I don't think it's time for a celebration, but we should certainly celebrate the wins that we have. But there's obviously a lot more that we should be doing.
Another difference is that the workforce is changing. I've been reading a number of articles in recent days about the marked increase in baby boomer retirements. After the recession of 2008, for example, baby boomers came back into the workforce in force, but it looks like, well, they were in their late 50s, early 60s then. Now they're in their 60s and 70s and have decided, even if they don't have retirement funds, not to come back into the workforce. So there's going to be a turnover in employment. There's an employment shortage. So 2 things. One, there are employment opportunities for people who may not have thought about energy as a career. But secondly, I think that's going to exert upward pressure on wages and salaries.
And if I could add, I think a huge difference too is people's engagement, and the pandemic in particular, I think in many ways got us, much more comfortable with technology, and got us to think, before if we couldn't all be in the same room, we didn't think it could happen, and we didn't think there could be meaningful dialogue through technology. But we've also seen this awareness. I mean, I know we're talking a lot about energy, but I would still say that the loss of George Floyd and the experience that happened across our nation to really highlight the inequities, not just with the challenges around policing, but just in general, communities, to treatment of people. I think the expectation that people sit in their living room now and expect to be connected, but they expect more justice. They expect the ability for an organization, for businesses to make more of a difference than they ever had before, and to have no excuses about distance or time or history. People really, really do expect change, and they expect it to be implemented, even if they decide not to come into the office every day. They expect there to be a substantial, true, and real difference.
Right, and just to piggyback off of everyone's points, there is a big change in the workforce. The boomers are retiring, and Gen Z and millennials are really entering the workforce, and they have different priorities. I just saw recently that 66% of Gen Z who entered the energy industry are more concerned with clean energy jobs than any, oil and natural gas jobs that have existed traditionally. In addition to that, there's been a lot of investment from our federal government and energy, clean energy and environmental justice initiatives, through the Inflation Reduction Act and the IJA as well. And so we see a big change that's occurring today. And I think that after 2020, there has been a lot of momentum to increase diversity numbers in not just the energy industry, but across the board. And as time has moved on, you hear less and less about that. And so one of the concerns that I have is, how do we continue this momentum? It needs to be more than a fad. Diversity and inclusion, energy justice is something that impacts people's lives. It impacts people's opportunities. It impacts the energy industry too, because if you don't have people who understand the implications of some of the business judgments and decisions, then we end up with business judgments and decisions that may negatively impact people who weren't at the table. So there's a lot of, it's a lot of progress, but there's still a lot of issues that remain, that still need to be addressed.
So before I pivot on something that I've heard come up a few times around employment and the changes in the workforce, Katora, I want to give you a chance to share any differences that you might have been thinking about as well.
Thanks, Christy. Yeah, so for me, I think I, pretty much echo, as Clarence has said, everything that everyone else has said, particularly the employment, as Clarence mentioned and went into more detail, is certainly, a change that I see, and it would also be a particular challenge. Not only do you have the baby boomers retiring, and then you have the millennials and Generation Z coming up, you're also seeing a shift in priorities from those generations. I think, just generally speaking, millennials and Gen Z appreciate and value flexibility as well as adaptability. And I think that that's something that perhaps some cultures and companies will have to shift in order to accommodate that more flexibility. I think COVID has shown us that working 5 days in an office is not necessarily needed in order to be productive. And I think that the younger generations value a hybrid approach to working and having that sort of flexibility. So that's certainly a consideration that I think companies will have to take into account if they are going to not only recruit, but also importantly, retain employees from those generations.
So with that being said, in the conversation around workforce diversity and also looking at it from a generational perspective, how do we've talked about some of the implications of the baby boomers retiring and the priorities of millennials and Gen Zers looking different. But in terms of, and Clarence kind of touched on it, they're interested more of the clean energy, alternative, energy source careers. Working in the oil and gas industry all these years and being a part of some natural gas associations currently, one of the sentiments that I've heard recently is the term fossil fuels, oil and gas. Those are like words that younger generations run from. So my question to the panel is, how do we promote the energy industry in a way that would resonate with millennials and Gen Zers, and thinking about it with a lens on diversity as we're doing so?
If I may. So I think information is key. I think that providing the younger generation with information on just what the energy companies do is really important. So while, there are oil and gas companies and fossil fuel companies, many of those companies do have emission targets and goals and are, working to reduce the emissions that they're outputting. And so for some members of those generations, that would be great. And they would be great to get behind that goal, but they may not know. So I think information is definitely key. I think reaching into the community and meeting people where they are is also key. Exposure. There are some, particularly junior students, in grade school who may not know much about the energy industry. They look around them and they don't have anyone who works in those industries. So exposing grade students to energy professionals who look like them are key. And I think that, that's part of the way in which they will see a path forward within this industry.
Right, just to piggyback off of Couture, I think that there really needs to be a pipeline between when you are in school, a STEM pipeline that goes directly into energy jobs. There needs to be a push from utilities, from other energy companies to invest in the future. And that means engaging diverse populations, especially Black African American populations, and exposing them to the possibility that this could be something that they could possibly do themselves in the future. And I think that then goes into the second point that Katora made, is that there needs to be somebody that they can see doing it so that they can believe that they can do it too. And so that goes back into the push for increasing the numbers of African Americans in energy jobs at all levels, not just having, a few here and there, but having it in different levels so that they can see that not only you can get this job if you learn the requisite skills, but you can also have a pathway towards promotion and, even becoming a member of the C-suite yourself. And so I think that those things are essential to opening the energy industry more broadly towards Black or diverse communities.
In terms of the oil and gas industry in particular, having been in both industries, I think one of the differences between what is now and where millennials and Gen Z potential employees see is that the industry sees climate change as an existential issue. And they see it as, see the current debate as an all or nothing oil and gas or clean energy. And part of the dilemma that we face is, how do we transition from today to that clean future? And what kinds of skills, what kinds of people do we need in the companies and outside advocating for those changes to make sure that there's not disruption that harms particularly energy dependent communities and communities of color. So at least for me, I think that the focus needs to be for millennials and Gen Zs. How do I help these companies move from today to that future that I think is better for the environment, better for the climate, better for communities? Because you can't do it outside the organization. You've got to have people inside thinking differently and more innovatively to help those companies make those changes that need to be made.
So one of the key things that I heard was, how do we provide information, education, and awareness? So that's kind of a theme that kind of bridges across some of the conversations. And whether we're talking about the clean energy future, or to Ms. Carolyn's point, how do we bridge that transition? And how do we tell a story across the industry that says they're actually interdependent on each other? If we, try to go fully electrification or fully, alternative fuel sources, what happens when those fuel sources aren't available, or there are reliability issues within those frameworks? So how do we tell a more compelling story or share more information on the role that different types of energy will play in the future. Any thoughts on that?
So I have a couple of thoughts on that one. And I think I would start with, to your point, it's the story that we tell, but I also think it's important to note who's telling the story. Who gets to tell the story? And oftentimes, I might challenge all of us as speakers and panelists and others, when we talk about community education or workforce, we always say companies need to do this, they should do that, those should do this, and they should. But the reality is that I would say the responsibility lies with us, right? So we as African Americans who work in this industry have an opportunity and I believe a responsibility to bring in other African Americans. Why? Because we actually know what the work is. We know how the work is done. We understand the business. We live in these communities. You know, we can communicate the story about our work and the value of our industry in a way that others cannot, with those who we share other kinds of commonalities. And so I think it's really important that we also tell that story. I think the other thing, though, and it's something that Carolyn said, is that narrative building in the grand scheme of things is rarely ever helpful. And so if we are trying to convince folks who work in oil and gas or large oil and gas companies to shift, and I don't actually think you have to convince them, many of them are doing it anyway, but if we believe that that's what we need to do, you can't do it by saying, these people are killing the planet, they hate us, and da-da-da. No one ever listens to you that way, right? It has to be a far more nuanced type of conversation. And I think we all have to participate in that conversation if we really want to see something different. And certainly from my own personal career, and I benefited from those conversations from people like Carolyn Green. And so I know that it works because I'm sitting here because she had that discussion with me 30 years ago.
And in fact, the discussion is not only nuanced, it has to be collaborative. It can't be just confrontational, and we've got to figure out ways that we work together, not always in opposition.
I agree with all that. I also want to bring in a little bit of what I see here in the chat. We have one of our attendees, Nicole Harold Lee, who very astutely picked up on some of the conversation that we were saying before we even got to those topics and said it was about education. It has to be. And ultimately, she added another comment here about being an external ambassador or an internal ambassador. I want to say that a couple of things, but tying these two topics together. This is such an interesting time because you can choose. You can choose if you're totally into renewable energy. There are companies sprouting up all over and thriving and growing, and that's what they do. If you want to be in the innovative side of things and you're thinking, and I often think that the technologies that are ultimately going to help us decarbonize aren't even on the table yet. Those career opportunities are there. If you want to look at it all and be in the financing area aspect of looking for these new innovations and helping companies and helping them match with investors that want to bring their resources, there are companies out there. But there are also, again, existing companies that have been around for years that have to make the transition to survive. You know, I'm an accountant by, that's my first language, by education and training. And one of my first clients was a photo finishing company. And I always talk about them because people go, what the heck is that? There used to be a place where you would take a roll of film and you drive your car and you drop it off and you put it in a pouch and they'd say, this is Tuesday, come back on Friday. And people would drive back and get their film on Friday and they'd see it for the first time. Technology has eradicated that because you have so much in the palm of your hands. With technology today, these are computers that are much more powerful than what the government used to run their operations. So every company has to figure out how are they going to make that transition. And I think, as Carolyn says, there are voices that are needed in every organization, whether they be a couple of years old, a couple of months old, or whether they be over 100 years old, thinking about how to make that transition. And I think, look, a company hires people for a myriad of talents that they bring. And you're hired to do a particular function, but you also have a voice, and you also have the ability to lean into conversations and to provide a different view, as alluded to earlier by Paula Glover. The different points of view that have to come up to say, look, I know we want to do another project, another product, but is that product, does it help us decarbonize? Does it help us reach a segment of our community that doesn't have the opportunity to really touch on new energy sources? Are we thinking about those dynamics? And then are we thinking about how do we educate? How do we share information and the different ways to do that, considering, again, not everybody even has technology. So I think everyone can be an advocate from wherever they choose. I don't believe that we should say you can't work for an oil and gas company, or you can't work for any other company that's existing, because every company is going to have its journey, and it needs people with fresh ideas, with passion, and a perspective that says we want to be a much more inclusive. It just makes sense not only to making changes, but it makes sense to the bottom line. Those companies that figure it out are going to be the ones that survive and thrive.
And that's what's key. And I'd like to bring it back around to the topic of the discussion, which is DE&I and ESG. Those are not just intellectual exercises. They really speak to how an organization is going to be sustainable in the future. And when you're in a corporation in particular, your value is not just in why the company hired you in the first place. It's in your ability to help them grow their revenues, their top and bottom line, and to sustain themselves over the long term, so that they don't go out of business in 2 years because the market has pivoted in a way that they can't respond. An interesting parallel is GE. I remember as a young executive being part of the GE Global Black Employees Network, in fact, representing Abe with GE and talking about energy and the environment, et cetera, and how important that was going to be. The Black Employees Network actually did Shark Tank-like competitions for people who had ideas that could be implemented by the company to make money. And thereby they were showing the value of different points of view, different backgrounds, different perspectives. And that's what we've got to do, whether it's a corporation, whether it's a startup, whether it is an NGO or a government agency. We've got to make sure that we're bringing our whole selves, our perspectives, all the things that have made us, so that that organization can function better into the future. And if we don't do that, shame on us.
So, Ms. Carolyn, you talk about these things in the context of how organizations can make some strides to function better. So I'm going to ask a provocative question. How confident are our panelists that, top executives of, critical energy companies across the industry are clear on this whole conversation around energy justice, environmental justice, diversity and inclusion, et cetera? Do you have a sense that they get it, they know what it's about? Or do you think they're still struggling to kind of wrap their hands around this very complex but important abstract sort of a area.
I don't think all of them, quote, get it. In many ways, energy justice is another one of the myriad of issues that has been foisted on the industry or on companies. And so it's a matter of being strategic and helping them think strategically about, if I don't pay attention to this, if I don't give priority.
You're on mute, Carolyn. I don't know if it inadvertently did.
Sorry, I think I accidentally hit it. What's going to happen to me down the line if I don't pay attention to this and if I don't make it a priority? Because if I don't have to, I won't.
Dr. Christie, you're muted.
I was going to say that, and I'm going to let you speak, Paula. But it just stuck out. It goes back to the topic, the theme. How do they balance this with the other things on their plate? Paula.
I was just going to add, I think it really, to Carolyn's point, it's more about education than anything else. I think you have a lot of, two things. You have a lot of senior execs who may get it, but don't know how to do it. And so there's one thing to understand and be empathetic and sympathetic and want to do the right thing. And there's another thing to be able to know how to implement that in a way that's going to work for your business, work for your shareholders, work for your employees. And so I think you have a lot of leaders who are kind of stuck on, how do I do this well? But I would also say we spend a lot of time talking about going to senior leaders, and we don't spend enough time talking about the people in the middle. Because the real challenge a lot of times is not the senior leader. The senior leader gets it. But if I'm Paula Gold Williams and I have a company of 4,000 employees or whatever, it's not reasonable to think that she knows what's going on at number 3,000 employees. It's just impossible. And so I think we like to educate our senior leaders, and we should, but we should be also thinking about, how do we educate everybody else? Mid-level managers, directors, vice presidents, supervisors, and because it has to trickle down. And if you don't get those mid-level leader positions to buy into this, it does not matter what the executive says. If they don't buy into it, it is not going to happen. And by the time that executive figures out that it's not happening, it is so too late that they may be, right, thinking about their own career because of that kind of failure. So we really do have to think about education, I think, much broader than our senior levels.
Right, and to bounce off of that, I think what Paula just said, it is a difficult challenge. And when you have a difficult challenge, it's easy to ignore it if you can, instead of addressing it. And one of the interesting things about 2020 was it was an environment that you could not address this. And as time has gone, it has, issues of race has become less heard in our collective society. I think that it's very easy to say, oh yeah, we made some gains here, and be okay with it, instead of sustaining those gains and furthering those gains. And so that's the challenge, and it's all at all levels. There needs to be a sustained effort to understand issues of DEI and the importance of having different perspectives and different voices, and actually tie that into the business objectives. And whether, and I guess then the question is, how do you do that? Does there need to be some kind of monetary incentive? Does there need to be some type of, and we've seen the government has done some things to try to incentivize at least energy justice. And so I think it's up to people like us and people who are, who keep this in the front of their mind to continue to push. And many times when you're the only one pushing, it becomes even harder to do that. So we need to not only push, but encourage each other and encourage those who we work with to push forward in terms of on issues of diversity and energy justice.
Oh, good points.
I was going to kind of tie in. Again, I love monitoring the Q&A
Yeah.
at the time. We have someone out here and they indicate they're anonymous, but I think it's a relevant topic. So from this angle, they said midstream, whether oil and gas, transportation, travel, when discussing alternative energy options, can there be consulting arms to support professional development and industry education? The reason why I think that is relevant is, okay, to your question, Dr. Murray, I think, unfortunately, more often than not, a lot of people don't get it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there is a broader awareness among our population that there is an issue, that there's a concern, that clearly when you look at in maybe the much older technologies, you probably see much fewer people of color. I'm proud of the fact that the person who followed me as CEO is the first Hispanic to ever run an energy company in our over 160-year history at CPS Energy, right? So people of color, even in communities of color, right? And in San Antonio, we have a community of color. I think still there, though, it's very hard to say that everybody gets the practicality of being much more inclusive and thinking about diversity and thinking about keeping your organization going, because you need talent from every part of our society, and that there are truly situations where people of color have a lot to say and a lot to offer, but oftentimes don't necessarily get those opportunities to do that. So I unfortunately think there is a lack of balance to the term that you put out here for us. There's a lack of balance on it, and that it's easy for organizations to get caught up in every other priority that we have. I mean, you look around the world, if you're personally worried about war and the disruption that is happening in Europe and the Ukraine, and then you think about supply chain issues, and then you think about inflation, and then you think about the challenges around politics, not just around the globe, but here in our own nation. And you get very concerned as an individual contributor, and even as a leader of people, are you keeping everything in balance and running? Are you keeping it running, let alone taking this monumental task of thinking about all of the additional benefits of trying to be much more inclusive and being very conscious about it and thinking about the communities that you serve? All that said, right? I think we've made progress. I think I do see, as Paula Glover indicated, I do see people coming up in leadership roles, and I do think that there's now an SEC rule that requires boards to think a lot more about the diversity of their boards, be it gender, be it race. But I worry, right? Are people really consciously doing it? Are they thinking they're going to get by? Are they thinking that they're going to color up the pools of people that are being considered, but not making the selection for people of color? So all that said, I think conversations like this and leaders like you see here and that are participating, it still is incumbent upon us to make sure that when we see a company trying to create balance and create prioritization, that the focus on DE&I can't fall off as a lesser priority. It's got to stay up there because it is such a big contributor to solving all of these other issues that we have. So I think we've made progress. I don't think it's quite enough. I think it's important for everyone to still think and tell everyone it's a priority, and that there are huge benefits for making sure that it's just as important to put these things about inclusion up at the top with every other priority that we have. And we have to just be great multitaskers.
So let me ask this question. We talk about energy, justice, diversity, inclusion, and all those complementary areas. But do you think that Is it fair to actually put those in the conversation around balance? Or do you believe that it's not a matter of balancing those priorities, or is it more of a matter of making these things more of a top priority?
At least for me, in my organizations, I make it a top priority. And certainly in the organizations to which I belong, I will cite the Alliance to Save Energy in particular, because Paula is there. The complexion, the personality of the organization has made a market change because she is the CEO and she is driving that change from within. I'm thrilled to see what's happening. It's not the same old people and the same old faces. There are new faces, new perspectives, but it's because someone like Paula is living it every day and making sure that she's holding her senior managers and making sure they're holding their folks accountable for results. It's the blocking and tackling. You know, we think we should have some silver bullet, but it isn't. It's a daily slog, and we've got to make sure we're keeping our eye on the ball and doing the things that we can do and need to do every single day to make those changes in an organization.
And I would add to that, to tie together Carolyn's point with Paula Glover's point. I think that having strategic, well thought out and tailored goals for a company will help with not only making DEI, ESG, and energy justice a priority, but also making it a priority from the top down, as Paula Glover mentioned before, about having that middle level, that middle management also buy into it. And what does that look like? Well, I think it varies from company to company. I think, companies do have to take a very close look and an honest look, into what the current state of their company is and how do they increase their diversity and, any other goals centered around these. So, these goals must be measurable and must be revisited, right? It's great to have the goal and to announce it, but if follow-up is not occurring, if, quarterly meetings or whatever the frequency of meetings around these goals are that it's appropriate for the company are not happening, then the progress that the company wants to make may not be there. So I'm always a fan of those strategic, measurable and actionable goals when it comes to, promoting and progressing in any area, but particularly these areas that we're discussing today.
Which really speaks to the importance of the G in ESG, because that's governance. It's how are you organizing yourself to accomplish your objectives. And interestingly, I used to think that that governance wasn't nearly so important as performance. And I remember saying to outside organizations who were pushing my company to adopt a sustainability plan, we are an oil company. We're not sustainable. So we're not going to, but look at what we do, not necessarily at what we say. I realize you've got to do both. You've got to look at what people say, how they organize themselves, and you have to look at the performance. If performance is on target, then the governance may or may not make quite so much difference. But if the performance isn't what you think it ought to be, then you really need to focus in and drill down into governance. Are they doing the things that need to be done to accomplish this goal? So at least for me, governance is key.
I think that's a common theme. I'm looking at the chat, and Abalola, one of our guests, mentioned that DEI needs to be around SMART goals with specific numbers to several themes that I've heard. We can then deploy the 5 E's of socioeconomic transformation, which involves education, which came out, enlightenment, empowerment, engagement, and entrepreneurship over time to achieve the goals. So I want to add to that, and going back to Ms. Carolyn's point around what are those areas that need more governance? What are we governing? What are the performance metrics around these important areas that you would want to see results around?
So I want to hop in. I was thinking that, and I really enjoyed Katura's answer, because I think having SMART goals is important, but what are we measuring? And I would say you have to be super specific, right? So if we think about kind of how this conversation has started to really boil up after 2020 and the murder of George Floyd, and became a DEI conversation, when I might argue that the murder of George Floyd is more of a race conversation than it is a diversity conversation. I just think diversity is much broader than what we were dealing with in the summer of 2020. But that then means that the goals that we meet have to be super specific. And I'll give you an example. I have a son who used to go to a junior boarding school in New Hampshire. Carol knows this, and I sit on the trustee board, and we created a DEI committee. And the trustee had all kinds of conversations that we couldn't figure out, like, how are we going to measure our success? And what do we mean by diversity? We have international students here already. Aren't we already diverse? And for me, what I said was very specifically, this school's American population, domestic student population, should reflect the domestic student population of the country, period. Right? So if 13% or 15% or 40% of the students in the United States are Latino, then I think this school in New Hampshire, 40% of their kids who are US based should be Latino. It's an easy way for us to transfer. And so when we make diversity goals that are not super specific, what happens is one group may fare well and another group may not fare as well. We've seen this where we have goals around supplier diversity, and companies that may have to have a diverse supplier spend as a goal. And you may see that certain diverse suppliers, maybe women-owned businesses do well and Black-owned businesses don't do as well. Maybe Latino-owned businesses do well and gay-owned business, like, I don't know, right? But what I'm saying is that if you're not specific about what you're looking for, inevitably somebody gets left behind. And that's a challenge and a nuanced dance, because being specific cannot be the same as checking the box. It cannot be the same as a quota. And so you always run the risk of specificity being assumed, but what you're saying is, I have a quota now and I need to hire X number of fill in the blank. That's not what I'm saying either, but I am saying that if you're not keeping track of those numbers, the result is not likely to be what you thought it would be when you started.
What gets measured gets addressed. Absolutely.
Pretty straightforward. So I want to shift a little bit. One of the comments in the chat was very interesting. One of the guests said, why is this the same old conversation? Please state some actions to take rather than restating the problem. So I think we have to do both, because I've heard both come out of the conversation, and the word that I've heard used as we've talked about some of the actions were opportunities. So I hear you, guest. I'm going to shift and let's talk about more opportunities to improve energy justice in vulnerable communities and the workforces in which can help support vulnerable communities with policy changes. I'm going to keep it more broad and see where that takes us. But let's focus, I would say the last 15 to 20 minutes on the opportunities. Anyone wants to share any general opportunities that stick out or resonate for them?
Certainly an opportunity that sticks out to me is entrepreneurship, particularly in light of a lot of the supply chain issues that we've been facing. There are opportunities for people of color, particularly those who have been in organizations, providing some of the services that those organizations now are scrambling for, to be an external provider and to build businesses and within the community. It is well documented that diverse businesses hire diverse employees. So the way we will build our communities is by building business and building, and thereby also building intergenerational wealth transfer. There are lots of companies that baby boomers have started and maybe have made successful that millennials and Gen Zers ought to take a look at and maybe buy them or go to work for them and then take them over, because they're not necessarily being passed down within families, but it is a way of building a career and also building a community.
I saw that comment too, and it's
I
right.
loved it.
It's right on point. But I do think, Christy, that we do have to talk about context at the same time that we're talking about solutions. Like, I think most people have to feel the change, and change is a whole lot harder than it sounds. And even though people may say consciously they agree, for them to actually make change, you gotta keep it at the forefront of their mind and create the solutions at the same time. I guess my point would be that oftentimes every organization is doing something, but the topic that I think needs to be added is how can they create more value and do some things differently than they have done before? Utilities, for example, most of them have outreach programs where they believe in doing scholarships, or they believe in some support in education, where they may go to every grade in a school and think about how can we give out coloring books or demonstrations. Okay, so there already is some type of program that they're doing, but I think ultimately there has to be this commentary again about, are we telling people how to utilize energy safely, but are we also, working with them on making them more aware about careers at every age? I don't know, you have to think about where you are, but for example, here in San Antonio, we also found that partnership was very helpful. So we found organizations that already had outreach, were already connected in education, and tried to find ways where we can do things together. We were working on a great program where we were taking our professionals, people that looked like the community, as Paula said, people that had grown up there, but maybe had never been in front of a camera, but we had them do a program where they talked about their career. And we said, in this case, you're going to be talking to first graders. And you want to talk to them about who you are and where you came from and what you do and why energy is important to you. And so there's something that utility companies would never do, but should be doing, should be reflecting the community that they serve, making a connection, thinking about, even though I may be an engineer, how do I really think about those that I serve generationally, their parents, their grandparents, and the kids that are coming up. And so finding those additional dynamics are really important. And I'll give another one. Utilities are always good for taking phone calls. They have call centers and people call all the time, and usually there are issues. What we learned is that it became just as important for us to call out. And so we created a group in our call center that made calls out. And we made sure that we asked customers, and we actually targeted customers that looked like they were having trouble paying. They were either paying slow or they were behind in their payments. And we said, hey, we have 10 programs that we want to make sure that you're aware of, that we want to make sure that you can know that you can participate and that we can automatically enroll you. And then we listened and we found out that some of the issues that people had didn't have anything to do with the energy. It had to do with transportation. And so we found ways to make connections with other organizations to give them the information they need. And then again, said the well-being that people have where they can live out their lives, it's energy enabled, but it's just so much more complicated than that. And, the thing that it did for our employees, it really created a true sense of pride and caring. And it really helped change our culture. And then we had those employees share those experiences with other people who never had a chance to talk to customers on the phone. So again, thinking outside the box and thinking about the things that you do, but how can you take extra steps and effectuate those changes, and then explain to people, you see what you've just done? You've now touched a part of our community that you never would have. You are thinking about education going forward. You are being helpful. You're helping solve problems, help create solutions, all of those things. And again, bringing back to the conversation of why and context and all of that matters while you're trying to solve real problems along the way. So those are some of the thoughts. And again, I want to thank you for telling us, hey, we got to get to some real solutions here.
Right. And, energy companies have a lot of power to hire contractors, hire other, law firms and things like that. And they can make the priorities that they need to have certain diversity numbers or certain percentages. And not only that, they can, like Paula Glover was saying, their supplier diversity. They can create programs to incentivize hiring African-American owned supplier companies to ensure that those companies are represented, which not only can create opportunities for these Black-owned companies, but also increase their exposure and their ability to get other work elsewhere. And it really helps to generate not only work for these companies, but also to create that community exposure and see that these companies, these Black-owned companies, can be successful. And it can also generate pressure for other companies to increase their diversity numbers so that they can be competitive for these bids. And so there are things that utilities and energy companies can do, not only internally, but externally to increase the percentages of African Americans throughout not only the energy industry, but even beyond that.
And I just want to piggyback and say that African American small businesses get the least amount of funding and capital invested to help them to grow. And to Clarence, to your point, any opportunities around having some sort of diversity incentives, mentoring programs. And one of the key things that if you're doing business like with the federal government and even other private sector companies, they want to see if you have past performance. So how do you create an environment where they can piggyback with maybe a larger company to gain more historical business opportunities so that it can help create past performance moving forward is something else that kind of tags along with what you were saying. I think Ms. Carolyn was going to speak next.
I have an environmental engineering company, and we had a really difficult time breaking into the energy industry and with utilities. Interestingly, even though my personal background was in the energy industry, I had lots of contacts with utilities through ABE, as a matter of fact. But to Clarence's, to your point, that past experience question kept coming up. So one of the things that utilities in particular are good at doing because of the regulation by utilities commissions, et cetera, is developing mentor-protege relationships. And in one instance in particular, we wound up being a protege of a much larger engineering firm in a community where, interestingly, the CEO of the firm happened to be an African-American male, and it had been an African-American male for 2 or 3 iterations, people that we knew because of ABE. We worked very well with this organization. They found the value of the work that we were doing. We went after a contract, and the company told us, this was a really good proposal if your company had been the prime and the large company, the sub, we would have given you this because that utility was looking at the issue of how do we build this capacity so that you're not just a sub, you can actually be a prime. And as a result of that, the next year, guess what happened? We were the prime. Our former mentor was a sub. We brought other smaller firms along with us, and we are now doing multi-million dollars worth of business with this company because of that. And we've got that that past performance that we can show. So those are some of the things that can happen. It is more likely to happen in the utility industry because of the pressure. They are regulated monopolies and have to show more so than some other parts of the industry. They have to show that they're reaching out and bringing along the parts of the community that may not have been serviced before, and that they are reflecting more the community that they serve.
I wanted to just add, I think, and I started my opening comments saying that I think the most of the opportunities are in efficiency. So I just want to amplify that a little bit. What we know is that even with this transition, I think it's like over 2 million jobs are efficiency jobs. And so when I say that, they aren't in the utility companies, they're in their efficiency. And so if we think about opportunities, we should be thinking about things like Carolyn's described, but also thinking about learning how to fix a heating system, becoming a plumber and electrician. If we are going to electrify as we are planning, like I would want my kid to really be, if that's something they want to think about doing, become an electrician, because that's a skill we're going to need forever, particularly if we're going in this kind of direction. We need to have people who know how to fix furnaces. We are promoting electric heat pumps, and I can tell you that many folks who don't promote heat pumps, it's because many plumbers do not know how to fix them. And yet we're putting tens of millions of dollars through the administration to encourage people to buy a piece of equipment that is far more efficient. We don't have the workforce to install or to fix them. So I want us to think creatively about, like, there are lots of things. Think about construction. Most of the jobs in our industry across sector are construction jobs. They are. And while they're cyclical, we should be thinking about those as other opportunities. And the opportunity for us as people of color to create our own businesses in an area that doesn't have a high entry point, right? So if you're a plumber, or you've got a group of friends and like he's a plumber and he's an electrician, they could form a company. And that might be a much easier entry point than buying something else. So that's just another way for us, I think, to think about opportunities in this business.
These are great points. And to your point, Paula, it's about building those networks and stepping out and looking at different professions and careers differently than maybe we've looked at them traditionally before. And you have to look at where there's a demand and the transitional need for, as opposed to what we've historically thought about in the past. Now, we have about 15 minutes left in our discussion, and I want to kind of keep us along the lines of the opportunities and being about the action and not just about focusing on the problem. But I do want to go to the chat and highlight a question or a comment that is definitely along the lines of what we're talking about. Let's see, there was a comment, and I hope I can find it. It was related to, and I don't see it now. It was related to getting out into the schools, and what are we doing to get out into the school environments and making sure that we share more about what we're doing in the industry, careers at different age levels. And I'm paraphrasing because I can't find the question now, but what are we doing to reach those students and professionals? I do a lot of work in the space of high school to students who are going to be next into the workforce and next into a collegiate environment. So what is our outreach in terms of opportunities in those different educational and student arenas?
So I'll start. One of the things that we have at the Alliance is we have an empowered school program, and we're now kicking off an empowered campus program. And so our empowered school program that's operating in only 300 schools across the country, so not a lot of schools, teaches kids K through 12, not only just about energy, but about efficiency. They get to do efficiency projects with their school, so they get to have some hands-on experience as to how do you put something together? What kind of savings can a light bulb really have? That sort of thing, depending on the project, depending on the school, depending on the teacher and the student. Our education program is certified to go with the curriculum in that state. So if you are a Common Core state, the teacher doesn't have to change their curriculum. Our curriculum meets Common Core standards. So we're excited about that. We also have an empowered campus program. So we're trying to do the same thing with older students, college students at minority serving institutions. So there will be some at HBCUs, but we're also looking at, schools and institutions that focus on Native students as well as Latino students. So that's what we're doing at the Alliance, and really have made a decision with the support of our board to really lean in on our schools program. And so anybody out there who's looking for a schools program, please reach out to us, because we have it. And it's online, it's flexible, like all the kinds of things that you really need to have if you're going to do something in a school that's going to get teachers to adopt them. So that's what we're doing.
And I'm going to ask one follow-up question, just because it's interesting. We talked about results and outcomes and metrics. What do you track as a part of your success from the work that you're doing?
We track, I think, emissions saved, right? Because this program is based on a project. So the students really do get to pick a school-based project that has some efficiency outcomes. And then the success is really measured on how much energy did we save based on the project that you guys have determined. And these kids compete. Schools compete against each other. Classrooms compete against one another. So that's one of the things that we'll measure. And then really, in addition to that, really testing, right? How much do kids retain? How much of this information do they remember? How much do they retain? Can they repeat it? What goes back to school? Because it is a part of their normal school day curriculum, they're going to have the normal kind of testing that they would with their teacher if it's in a science class or mathematics class. They've just infused what we do at the Alliance as part of their teaching mechanism.
One of the things that my company, when I was in the oil industry, did was establish an academy with a high school in Philadelphia. Unfortunately, the program has kind of fallen by the wayside as the company's fortunes have changed, but establishing those kinds of partnerships with schools so that there is not only, like Abe does with the Energy Awareness Month activities and their scholarship programs. And I got a shout out to Abe about that, with over certainly $500,000 in scholarships almost every year, with all of the local programs, the regional and the national programs, and the mentorships that they do with those students. It's not just you give the student money and send them on their way. They mentor them. They provide internship opportunities for them for the summer, point them in the direction of co-op programs, etc. That works for students who are going to college, but plumbers don't necessarily need to have a college education. Electricians don't necessarily need to have a college education to get into the industry. So partnering with school systems to make sure that there are programs for students who are not necessarily thinking about college immediately also makes sense. And it's not, interestingly, when you bring those up, oftentimes in our community, it's, well, are you being classist? you should be focusing on getting students into college. No, not every student is going to go to college, and we can't forget about those students who are not necessarily thinking in a college track. So making sure that we're educating plumbers and technicians and drone operators and those sorts of people is equally important. And those are things that you can do at a community level, and they change the environment at a local level.
So to Ms. Carolyn's point, I think you're absolutely right. There are opportunities to provide scholarships, mentorships, and internships to students who are on a track other than a collegiate track. And we, when I work a lot with students in another role that I have. But what's surprising to many students who aren't interested in college is that there are scholarships, internships, and funding available, and we should make even more available. So I would challenge us all to, as I think I heard someone say earlier, we have to be able to change our models and look differently at it. So how do we create more programs and opportunities and awareness over the funding available for vocational trade school educations instead of a traditional 2 or 4 year college track for those who want to enter the workforce at an earlier rate than, maybe going to a 4 year college?
One thing I would contribute to on this is, again, I'm going to speak from a utility perspective, but it is important to recruit at every level of the organization. And there are great careers in the utility industry where you don't have to go to school, and there are people who have never gone to school and can make $100,000 based upon a year, based upon the technical work that they do in the field. The journeyman craft skill set is broad within the utility industry, and again, just based upon how committed they are and their efforts, can really do quite well. But I also think that the utility company has to be conscious again about trying to recruit from all aspects of their community. There oftentimes is not a lot of outreach to go to high schools and talk to young students about the career potentials, the things that they can do, and the ability for them to maybe start without a college degree, but there's typically educational assistance that happens within an organization to get them both training to continue their career, but also if they want to say, I now want to go into a professional job and take my experience that I have in the field, which is extremely valuable, and take it elsewhere in the organization, can happen. So, and I would say, even if the person wanted to go in the solar industry, learning how it really works, boots on the ground, to install panels, to technically help homeowners own their own system, all of those things, those career opportunities are all available at the entry point. But it does require an organization to be conscious about how they can recruit, where they recruit from, how did they educate, those kind of things, and making sure that their HR departments are being very, very conscious about looking for a diverse pool of people and giving them the education that they need.
Paula, there's a question that really ties into what you're talking about in the chat. Talent recruiters at grassroots play a role in culture development. How important is it that these individuals are charged with DEI initiatives, trained in emotional intelligence, and the dynamics of the roles necessary for clean energy shifts?
Well, I'll just make a couple of quick comments to say that extremely important. We had our HR department experiment with certain things like blind resumes and blind applications, like you can't see their name. All of those things that would typically give you an indication of their background, we scrubbed those and left the content. We left the essence of what our applicants were doing. But it was really important to talk to our HR department about. They were really important in helping us change how we recruited, how we outreach, how we brought people in. and to think a whole lot about not only that, but also helping people in their career development. I mean, you have your recruiting arm, but you also have your training, an education group within your HR, and then your succession planning part of your people and culture aspect of what you do. I felt like if I couldn't get my HR team to see the vision with me, that the organization was going to fail. It is that critical because they see so many things that a CEO isn't focused on, or an executive isn't focused on. So making sure that they believe that career that a person might have in your organization that could last anywhere from a year to 30, and they saw every aspect of it. It's absolutely critical to have your HR team buy into the culture you're trying to create.
Thank you. So as we bring our panel discussion, really, I think we have about 3 minutes left. I would just want to generally ask any of our panelists, are there any parting thoughts you have around balance? How do we move the energy justice, not just the conversation on problems, but the solution-oriented or the action-oriented focus? How do we move it forward from here? And what are your final parting thoughts?
I'll start. So my final parting thought would be this, and we started by talking about how do you balance justice with everything else. And I know that my panelists know that I struggle with that idea of balancing justice, as I don't think that's a thing to do. What I would say is, if you don't move forward this DEI conversation into real work, there is no justice.
That's right.
They are tied together. And if we're not going to be just, then I'm actually not quite sure what we're doing in the first place. I just think justice is a thing that is foundational to what we do, and the way that we define it may be different, but it's foundational. And so for me, if we're not going to do that, then I don't know that we're doing anything at all. Those will be my final comments, and hopefully Carolyn Green and I will be employed tomorrow. You let me know.
I absolutely agree with Paula. You have to start from with justice as the overlay, and then everything follows from that. There's justice and there's mercy, and I guess I have no mercy for an organization if it's not being just in the way it is operating, and the way it treats its people, its and its communities, its customers, etc. So I guess my final parting thought is, what gets measured gets addressed. So you have to decide what it is you want. You've got to develop measurements and then hold people accountable.
Right. I'll just say this. I think one thing that history has taught us is that we can't afford to balance justice.
That's right.
If we want to make a change, and if we want to actually solve the problem, we have to prioritize it and address it. And that's the only way to correct the issues that we face as a society. So any balance that we need, that we have, should not be, consequential of diversity, equity, inclusion, energy justice, ESG pushes. I think it's too critical to balance those things.
Well, I think I would just add that, look, I think it's always difficult, to figure out how to solve every issue, but I do think it's really important to make those efforts and steps and do everything as incrementally as you can, and think, ultimately I've done certain things, and I look back collectively and look how important those things are collectively. You're not going to figure everything out, but you do need to not paralyze yourself wondering what the first right step is. and just lean into those things and make progress and stick with it consistently. Keep the focus going, keep the conversations going, and keep those individual initiatives that you start, follow through on them, and they do make a difference over time.
You mean, how do you eat an elephant one bite at a time?
That's right.
And I would just add that smart, tangible, and measurable action is key. And I think, that requires companies to take a closer look, and it can look, at themselves internally, and it can look a number of different ways. It can be action in terms of hiring consultants, or it can be action in terms of partnering with existing programs in order to advance the DEI and energy burden goals. And to that end, Ms. Paula Glover, ADC, will certainly be reaching out to see how we can partner with you with the Power Schools programming.
Hopefully so. And listen, I paid my membership dues, so.
I wrote that down too, so I concur.
Yeah, because oftentimes we don't have to necessarily recreate, something from the ground up.
Nope.
We can often just partner with others to offer that expertise to combine together to make whatever is already in the works just that much better.
I love it. So did I cover all the panelists? Ms. Green, did I give you an opportunity?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. So on behalf of all of us here, I want to personally thank our guests who joined us, our panelists for a very rich dialogue, and Denton's for helping to bring about and hosting and creating this opportunity, all the ADC chapter members, and the Keystone Policy Center for partnering to make this event possible. So we hope that everyone learned some new things and took away some opportunities that we can individually within our organizations and other affiliations be able to continue to carry that torch towards a better energy justice future for all. So thank you very much.
Thank you for masterfully shepherding us through this conversation.
Absolutely. Enjoy the rest of your days.
Thank
Take
you,
care.
everyone. That was amazing. Appreciate you.